Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're so glad that you're joining us today. My name is Alexandria. I am one of the co-founders of The Disruptors, and Jasleen is my co-founder here. We also have our guest, Kathleen, and I'll let them both introduce themselves in just a moment. A little bit about me, if you're new here. I am an executive leadership coach and the co-founder, like I said, of Disruptors. It's a job board and community meant to serve those from underrepresented communities to find companies that they can thrive in. Jasleen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jasleen. I am a certified career coach and I focus on women in the tech industry and co-founder of The Disruptors. And so this month has been all about amplifying and uplifting Black voices. It is Black History Month. And today we're talking about identity at work. So what does it really mean to be marginalized in the workplace? I think we all have sort of a mental model of what this means or what it could mean, but we really want to have a thoughtful conversation about this because there's a lot of nuance to this topic. And we're so excited to have Kathleen on here. I've met Kathleen once before, but I felt like I've known her forever because I've been following her on TikTok at KMJ Diversity. We're both TikTok creators and love the content. And we wanted to invite her into this space to have this conversation with us. And so, Kathleen, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Kathleen Johson. Pronouns are she, her. And I am over on Vancouver Island, Songhees and Esquimalt Nations land, and very happy guest here. And I am originally from Calgary, Alberta. I was born and raised there. My parents are West Indian immigrants from Grenada. They're both from Grenada and came here as the first wave of Caribbean immigrants back in the early 70s, I'd like to say, late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, we're kind of a legacy family to Calgary, Alberta. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell, a really quick nutshell.
Okay, so let's get into it, shall we? So, the first question I wanted to cover is really what is the history of Black History Month? So, really, how did it start? How has it evolved? Do we really need one? Or, and what should we be doing during Black History Month? Should we be only looking back, or is there more to it?
That's a great question. It's funny because every year this comes up, and I think it particularly came up last year when Kanye West was saying, enough of Black history. We don't need to look back anymore. We need a Black Futures Month, not a Black History Month. So it wasn't always a month. It started, an African American, Carter G. Woodson, started it, and it was a week. And then it blossomed into a month, and then different countries started celebrating it. So Canada, the UK, I believe Australia might. I don't think I'm 100% on that, but different countries started celebrating it for the month of February. And February wasn't chosen because it's just the short end of the stick, so to speak, the shortest month. So they just threw February at us. It does have significance for who founded it. So there is a reason for it being when it is. But yeah, I think there's a case to be made for both. And I'm always a fan of history because I think it's just essential to learn not only not to repeat bad things or things that we've done in history that don't serve us very well now, but also to just be thankful, to just be grateful and remember who came before you and who paved the way, especially when you're talking about a traumatized population like the Black diaspora. It's important to remember who actually really sacrificed their lives for where we're at today. So I think it's important to look back, but also there's a case to be made for looking, ahead or in the present and seeing what Black people are doing now that contribute to science or, health or any kind of innovative field. what are we doing now? And so there's a case to be made for both. But I think saying don't look back is not a message that I support for our people, especially because a lot of us don't know our history at all because we were cut off from it.
Yeah, I think that I really like everything you said there. Like, I do like the forward movement and being able to look into the future. But the other piece of so many don't know the history, right? And that being important and that connection and anchor point being valuable and centering for a lot of people. If you had one thing that you wanted to share with people that maybe push back on that, that don't want the history part, what argument would you make? Or maybe argument is more aggressive than we would want to be there, but like what would you want them to connect to understand the importance of that history?
Well, number one, no other cultures are told not to look at their history. We don't say to Chinese people, oh, don't look back. We don't say to South Asian people, oh, you don't want to look back. We don't tell any other group that. And so I think that's one thing I would ask is why? Why do you want Black people not to look back? Is it because it's too painful for you? If it's too painful for you, then that's another thing, and that's something for you to unpack for yourself. But I don't think it's something necessarily like blanketly applies to the whole diaspora that no, we shouldn't look back.
Yeah. It makes me really think of kind of parallels with the Indigenous community. Kathleen and I are both in Canada, and so we refer to this body of work as truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous community. I've heard the word reparations used a lot in the Black community from a US perspective. And so I'm hearing that it's both. It's we look back, we honor those who came for Black folks, to honor the people who paved the road for them going forward, and for us non-Black folks, what are we needing to honor in terms of truth, in terms of so that we can move forward in a place of justice, in a place of equity. And so I guess what I'm hearing is Black History Month should be both.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to, I mean, it is named Black History Month. So I think it is a special time for us to, to reflect on the past. And mention, of course, what we're doing now and what's ahead of us. But yeah, I think it's a time for us to really sit with this is what came before us. What were we doing before we were even enslaved? Where were we at? What are our foundational heritages from continental Africa? And that's really what I usually use this time for is to look back and say, well, what were we doing before we got here? And so, yeah, I really like to dig back, and I'm very interested in, language and dress and architecture and culture from we're an ancient people. So there's a lot to reflect on at this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about what it means to be to be a part of a marginalized identity at work, and what that means and how that might look. Would you mind sharing a little bit of your thoughts on that?
Sure. It shows up in a lot of different ways. I think we're all familiar with the term microaggressions. So it shows up in these smaller, more subtle ways a lot of the time, overtly as well, of course, but a lot of the time it's more subtle. So it might be a comment about food you brought for lunch. It might be a coworker asking you about your hair. Oh, you had it this way last week and now it's this way, or can I touch it? Or how do you do that? What do you put in it? It can show up as people talking over you in meetings, or taking an idea that you had and saying that it's their idea. And all these little kinds of ways where it shows up. It can show up in we're finding there's a lot of stats on pay gaps that a Black woman earns 60 cents to what a white man earns on average.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are starting to be unearthed, and they're starting to show that there are real consequences that people pay for being Black at work, that are, kind of goes beyond irritants or minor annoyance. It has real implications in people's lives.
Mm. And so I'm just kind of thinking about that in terms of what that does to someone in the workplace. And so as a Black woman, or as, a Black employee in an organization where these microaggressions are taking place, and you're kind of thinking, I might want to go somewhere else, but is it going to be the same in this new organization? When we're thinking about this, how do we navigate that to really understand the truth of what's happening?
Yeah, that's something that, like, are you asking for how does the marginalized employee navigate that and impact that?
Both. I think both. Like, how does the employer know that this is happening in their environment? And then also, for as a Black employee, how do you manage that burden, and what do you do about it, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I think first, an employer, from that standpoint, they have to create an environment of safety, so that people can come forward when something is bothering them, or when something more insidious is happening, and that may indicate a systemic issue. They won't know because a lot of Black employees feel like they'll face repercussions for coming forward. They'll just get labeled an upstart, or a troublemaker, and put back in their corner. And so I think that safety aspect, that psychological safety aspect, to then know, yes, I can come forward, and for the employer to educate themselves on these issues that Black employees face. We all have the same internet, so educating themselves is good too, because sometimes if you go to what I hear a lot is, yes, I can go to my leader. That safety is there. I feel like they'll be receptive and they'll understand to a degree, but they might not believe me, or they might not know that asking to touch my hair is a big deal. And so they'll be like, oh, well, did you talk to her? Can you just? And so then the onus is placed back on the person that's faced the injury, to rectify the situation. Take them for a coffee, have a conversation with them. And that's not something everybody's comfortable doing. So I think there needs to be real things that are in place that kick in when something like this happens, a real policy or a real action plan, that can take that burden off of the marginalized employee, and for something to actually be done about it. Because a lot of people just don't say anything because they're like, nothing's going to happen anyway. So I'm just going to quietly quit. And when I find something else, I'll move on. And yes, I mean, it can be a game of, why would I leave? Because I'm just going to find the same thing wherever I go. It's always been like that anywhere I've been. But you do pay that loyalty tax as well. So people just kind of, navigate these things by making moves when maybe more money comes up, or a different position comes up that maybe is better for their career. But yeah, I think there is that level of apathy that why bother? It's just the same everywhere.
Yeah. And that's really one of the reasons why we do what we do at the Job Disruptors, is because we want to help employers have that mindset in terms of understanding the environment, because they might not even notice the symptoms, because the psychological safety isn't there to begin with, and they're not coming forward. People are not feeling safe to say these microaggressions are happening, or even just the way we're doing work, the way we've set it up, it's just not conducive to supporting Black folks in that environment. And I love that you said that about putting the onus back on to the employee, because I think as leaders, we're always trying to motivate and coach and develop our employees into being, future leaders. And so part of that is we say, okay, well, you need to give this feedback, and here I'm going to coach you on how you can give that feedback and exert your power or authority. But when we do that with marginalized groups, we are ignoring the invisible power dynamic between leaders and even peers that are not Black. So if there is that sort of white supremacy kind of mindset or behavior that is happening in the organization, and you don't feel safe, even if and so I can speak to, even in my career, there have been cases where even I don't want to share too much personal information from my experience in HR, but okay, let's just say where a marginalized group was in a more senior position, receiving microaggressions from subordinates. And so I think it's important to say, okay, we're looking at these hierarchies in the power structure, but there are invisible power structures that are part of society that underpin that. And so how are we switching from coach or leader to ally to help make the environment safe, and not put the onus back on the person who's experiencing the microaggressions?
Yeah, I think you're not an ally because you took a workshop. That's a progression, and it's a journey. Allyship is a journey. And acknowledging where you're at goes a long way with marginalized folks. Like if you just say, hey, I don't understand why this is a problem, but I'm going to educate myself on it because it's obviously an issue for you. And I want to make sure that you're safe and that you're comfortable. I think just even a statement like that, just honestly saying, yes, I'm the boss and I'm supposed to know, but I don't know. But I'm going to educate myself, and I'm going to find out how to help you. But basically, I believe you. I think there's, I just even in my own language, I'm trying to move away from saying lived experience to lived reality, because I think there's a lot to be said for that, in the sense that you can't deny someone's reality, but you can deny their experience, because an experience could be relative. And so I think the part that's missing, and that the part that leads to allyship, is belief. Like when somebody comes to you and says something, are you gaslighting? Are you saying, are you sure? We have been Black our whole entire lives. We're sure. There's rarely a time where we pull out the quote unquote race card arbitrarily. Like we know. So I think that belief factor goes a long way. And for us to navigate certain things, I think it's, I really don't know if, I mean, again, being aware of placing the onus on somebody marginalized to navigate is just shifting, and shifting the culture is a leadership responsibility. And so, when people say things like, well, why is everything about race? Are you sure? We didn't make everything about race. So, I mean, to make that clear as well, is I just want to show up and do my job. I don't want to have to navigate this stuff. So I think just, knowing who the burden of proof is on, knowing who the onus is on to rectify wrongs, or to shift culture, is a leader's job. And so I think that putting that just in its proper context and placing it on the shoulders it should be on, it's a skill set. And I realize, for a lot of folks, they haven't ever talked about race in their life. And in 2020, all of a sudden, it's the hot topic. And not only marginalized folks are having this discussion now. So it's new for a lot of people, but it's not new for us. And so I think having that dialogue with each other is really important, and being honest. And Brene Brown talks about this a lot, being vulnerable, and folks saying, hey, I don't get it. And us saying, I know you don't get it, but please listen to me and please believe me.
I love
I
that.
think, I think that believable part, right? Paramount, foundational, right? Just when I talk to people, and we talked a little bit about this last week, right? Intention doesn't equal impact. So it doesn't matter what your intention was. If somebody tells you that something impacted them in a way, believe them, right? Like that's the easiest thing that you can do. And then remove yourself from it. Like, oh, I didn't intend to do that. That doesn't matter that you didn't intend to do it. It had an impact. And you've been given an olive branch and an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to do different. And the other thing that I want to highlight when you said, as a leader, I should know, but I don't, and I'm going to go educate myself. If you make that statement, do it. You have to follow through on it. Like, don't just say it and then never do it, because that will have way worse implications and ripple effects. And just like highlighting, you should be doing it anyway. And if you say it, make sure that you actually follow through on doing that, because it is your responsibility as the leader to change and adjust culture and to educate yourself, because you're the one who's setting the tone. And whether you like it or not, people are looking to you to set the tone. If that's uncomfortable, I get it. And you're in a leadership position.
And often it could be that ego that's getting in the way. And so think about that for anyone who's listening. If this is uncomfortable work for you, it could be that your leadership style is to be the fixer. It could be that your leadership style is to always have the answers. And so think about where that's coming from. And so it's coming from a good place, but just because it's coming from a good place doesn't mean it might not have a bad impact. So as leaders, we need to be agile. We need to be, our style needs to suit the situation and the need. And so I love, Kathleen, all the things you said: be honest, be vulnerable. I believe you, powerful statement. And how do we create safety for you? And take some time to think about that, because you might not have ever been asked that question before. And so as a leader, your employee may not have ever been asked that question before. And so they may need some time to think about it, because they've just been coping and they've been, putting up boundaries, and they were like, what? I didn't even think that this was ever anything, that would be pitched to me. And so be patient with that, understand what safety looks like, and to Kathleen's point, start shifting the culture. And so I love that we're having some comments come in. So as you're watching this, if you have any questions, please put them in. Any key takeaways that are standing out for you, put those in the comments. So Christopher says he's got to go, but his key takeaway is belief. Love it. And we have another user that says, I created a piece of content about lived experience in regard to expanding our definitions of diversity. And now I'm changing the wording to lived reality. Thank you for that. All right. And so what are I think we already talked about some of the pitfalls, like we talked about ego and not being vulnerable, but what are maybe some of the other pitfalls that we haven't talked about that we need to avoid when it comes to how we view Black talent?
That's a great question. I think it's to remember that there's not the Black community, there are Black communities. And we're as individual and varied as anybody else. We're a Republican, we're Democrat, we're in the LGBTQ community as well as being Black. We are disabled as well as being Black. So we're as varied and as dynamic, not one-dimensional as anybody else. And so I think in approaching every Black employee with the same broad brush, we all have different experiences. We're all from different countries with different cultures. So just allowing us to bring that into a space. When you're considering Black talent, consider them as they are, and just as what they're presenting, and give them room for that, and not those stereotypes and those biases that creep in about what a Black prospective employee might want or need. Don't assume that, and just hear from them. These are my needs. This is what would make me happy at work. This is what would make me feel fulfilled at work. It's as varied as it is for any other group.
Yeah, I love that don't make assumptions, because I feel like stereotypes can go, like, even when we think they're positive stereotypes, right? We think it's a positive stereotype because we're like, all Black people need help because they're a marginalized group. And you might be thinking they all need a mentor. They all need, right? And so if we come from this mindset of treating, like you said, it's Black communities, there are nuances within that. And so you're still, like, I think this is where some people get tripped up with it. It's like it almost furthers that power dynamic when we say, okay, you're marginalized. So when we start treating people that way, we say, okay, we are going to think about race as a construct in the workplace and what that means. And so now we've actually gone the other way and have started creating behaviors that might, where you might say, okay, you need help, I'm going to assign you to this mentor. But did we ask whether this mentor feels safe for them? Did we ask what their career goals are and what they want? And so really treating them with that respect of that you would any employee. It's still about good leadership, and it's not about making things, feel like special treatment, but being aware of your biases so that you're removing that barrier for folks. Do you feel like that's accurate to kind of what you said?
Yeah. And also to, like I said, just ask them, what does success look like to you? What does that feel like for you? And how can we support you in that? And yeah, I think just really not assuming that, somebody that's Black in your organization is going to want what the next Black person in your organization wants. And that, I think the main thing too to keep in mind about talent of color is that, don't expect us to show up like you expect white men to show up. We're going to show up differently. And, that's where the stereotypes come in. Like, because I'm very soft spoken, actually. I'm not a kick the door down, take up space kind of person. That's not my comfort zone. And I find that I have to actually navigate that. And it's come back on me like, oh, you don't speak enough in meetings, or I'm a listener. And when I say something, I'm informed when I say that, when I speak. I don't like to just talk just to hear myself. But I find that's a stereotype that's come back on me a little bit. And so just let us show up how we show up, give us that space. We're not all going to show up the same way, or a way that like I said, that's more in line with how mainstream society would like us to show up, or recognizes, oh, this is how a Black woman's supposed to show up. And, it's like, no, just get to know me and let me show up as is best for me, because that's when I'll do my best work.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying there, right? Like, I'm a whole human in front of you. And as a leader, allowing your team members to be that whole human. And I love what you said about just ask, right? It's not that hard. All of this workaround and like, oh, if I do this, this, and this, and attempting to make these wide policies, when you could just have a conversation and you could just meet that person exactly where they are in the moment and allow them the space and ability to speak for themselves. We talk a lot about empowering people at work and, oh, I want them to be empowered for this and empowered for that. Then empower them to think for themselves by asking what they need and what they want, and then believing them and doing your job as a leader to follow through on making those things happen. And I know that we haven't always had that as a normalization in the workplace of like, oh, asking, what do you need to feel fulfilled? What do you need to feel motivated, or any of those things? But if we're shifting into a new center of leadership that's human first, like, ask and then follow through. Like, it seems a lot more simple to me, but yeah, I don't know. That this is why I have been pushed to the outlying of leadership for a long time. So I'm really glad that we're moving to a human first leadership model. But you were also talking about normalizations, right? And patterns and the systemic thing. And I want to highlight the white supremacy in that, and specifically the patriarchy white supremacy in that. How do you think that that has shaped what we see as normalizations in the workplace? And which ones would you want to push back on the most initially, like almost like a domino that you could push over to make some big changes?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think a lot of our patterns are just old. They're just formed off of what is valued in terms of output, in terms of performance, in terms of, like I said, what do we think of when we think of a successful person? And moving towards like for instance, bringing in those cultural values that people hold that might resonate more with them. Like a lot of marginalized folks are from more communal cultures. They're not from cultures that are as individualistic. So how do you speak to them in terms of team goals rather than individual goals? I think that kind of would speak to them more, instead of showing up as this is about me, this is about where I'm going in the organization, this is about just me. I think there's that really resonates with a lot of folks that come from more communal situations, where it's like, maybe maybe you have more open knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer, and it's not gatekept. And maybe you think about ways to bring people along with you when you get a promotion. Like, what does that look like? So I think, that mentoring piece, that's a communal value that can be adopted. How do we bring people along? Job sharing is something that I've really come to like. And, how do we shadow and job share and share and bring folks along? It's not, that's a part of the white supremacist, I find, model is there's only so much to go around. There's only so much power. There's only so much resources. There's only so much knowledge. There's only so much money. So it really becomes a hoarding situation where things are sequestered and gatekept, because if I share with you, I'm giving up something for myself. And, I think that is a part of what really needs to change, and what I'd like to see completely dismantled, because it just winds up being this place that it does cause environments to be very psychologically unsafe for everyone. When you think like you have to watch your back because somebody's coming for your job, or somebody is working on tearing you down, or how does that feel going into that every day? So and there's really no need for it, because evidence shows that teams function better when that's taken out of the equation. And so, I think that high level of competition aspect we would do well to get rid of that. And like, how do we foster talent, nurture talent, and help people to thrive in a less competitive way?
Yeah, I love everything you said about the scarcity mindset, right? Like, that's not helpful for anybody. And everything that you just talked about, having that shift away from the scarcity mindset and more into the community modeling is helpful for everybody. The system that white supremacy has set up, like, it's not good for anybody. And so upholding it is just harming everyone. So being able to dismantle that and move into that collaboration, move into that teamwork, move into we're all here together and we can all solve the problems together. Like, I don't know, we would become unstoppable in a lot of ways, in my opinion.
I think it's so hard because like we've got this sort of copy paste culture of, okay, so we're starting a new business and what does that look like? by virtue of the typical organizational structure, that in itself creates a scarcity mindset, because you have fewer positions of power at the top, where we've got, lots of entry level. And I hear this a lot from my clients too, because I think the communal aspect for women of color, of, all sorts of intersections, that we do value collaboration. In feminine culture, we are conditioned to be interdependent. And so definitely more so in certain cultures than others. But as a whole, this has been proven to lead to more innovation, lead to more productivity. But how can we do that differently? How do we shift towards maybe a flatter structure? And also just not looking at just the structure, because I have seen and worked with organizations that have moved to a flatter structure, but the behaviors are still very much hierarchical, command and control behaviors. So think about, okay, what are the behaviors we need as a company to include all of our employees, but also what are those behaviors that are going to get us to thriving in the future in a new way? It doesn't have to be the tried or true, sacrifice and, scarcity and command and control. We have evolved as a species. We know better. We can do better. We don't have to be working from that emotional brain where we see everything as a dichotomy. We can access our higher level thinking and come up with creative solutions. And so I love this conversation, because I feel like it benefits the Black community, but it benefits everyone, right? And I think that's what we need to do, is a shift on leaders is, and one thing we talked about with Tony last week from Racial Equity Insights was that spotlight. I forget what the other one was, but the model of, okay, where are we putting the focus on in terms of the work? So yes. So can you speak to that, Kathleen, a bit? Because I think, we've got a lot of organizations that say, oh no, we have ERGs, we have, this and that. And so how do we need to think about the work that needs to happen?
I think we need to, I'm such a big fan of the internet. Maybe I shouldn't be so much, because I'm hearing how unhealthy it is. But
eggs were once unhealthy too. So, I think it's how you use it.
I love eggs.
Same.
Ruining my life. They're so expensive right now.
Oh, yes.
But I think that we need, when you talked about, just going back to a second, when you talked about lateral structure, and it can't just be structure, it has to actually manifest in behavior. Yeah, I think that's something that is really important in terms of shifting things. If I'm answering your question, is that who's considered knowledgeable, and why are they considered knowledgeable? Why? Because somebody has a master's or a PhD. Why is their opinion given more weight than somebody else's who obviously has lived it?
Yes.
And I think we even tend to do that in our own communities. Why should somebody listen to me more than somebody who's actually gone through something? Because I have, again, markers of, I have a degree, I have markers of what is considered criteria for being allowed in certain spaces. So I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think you are. I love what you said that about how we give weight to people who have that degree or that standing. And it kind of reminded me of something you said before, because you said, we didn't make everything about race. Like white supremacy as a culture has been like, okay, I'm not white. I don't know why I'm saying we, but whiteness, because whiteness as a construct, we've all kind of got a relationship with that. And it has been about studying the other, right? Where whiteness is centered and everyone else is an other. And so I have this degree and I've studied all these cultures, but it doesn't matter that degree that you hold. It will never give you the perspective of the lived experience. And so when are we weighting the data, and how are we looking at where that data is even coming from? And we're going to talk about that next week in terms of using data on this anti-racism journey. But really looking at it from a lens of, why are we only rewarding, this mindset of elitism or whiteness centered in the work? And so, because when I said, what do we do about the work? I think that's the thing. Whiteness needs to be centered as the work instead of putting the onus on Black folks or other marginalized groups.
Yeah, because I mean, I think every marginalized person goes through this. You knock yourself out trying to, like I said, check all the boxes.
Yeah.
Degree, speak English a certain way, look a certain way, dress a certain way, mannerisms a certain way. And it still doesn't matter at the end of the day, because you still face what you face. And it's frustrating because you're like, I knocked myself out trying to show up as a white man and still. So I think that it speaks to also the communal aspect of how a lot of marginalized cultures function. It's not, a lot of time, it's not the person with the degree that you go to for a perspective or for advice or for a level set. It could be your auntie, it could be an elder, it could be somebody in the community that's regarded as a knowledge keeper. And so letting more of that in, would go a long way to understanding things and decentering that white construct, that perfection aspect.
Yeah.
I just find that that's one thing that I love about when I retreat back into my culture is, I don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
I can actually just, I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of relationship. I'm worthy of connection. And I didn't have to say something perfectly. I didn't have to show up perfectly in order to receive
and
that.
even the definition of perfect, what does that mean? Does perfect mean, is that by definition whiteness? Is that by definition like professionalism that's centered around whiteness? Like what does perfect mean? And is it perfect if it's inauthentic? That's kind of
perfect. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so that's the cruel irony of it, because we're all chasing something that doesn't exist anyways. So you are going to knock yourself out and get burnt out and get frustrated and angry and all kind of exhaust your EFAP package or whatever you got going on, because it's not attainable. It doesn't exist. No. So I think just divesting from that is a really huge piece to moving forward in corporate cultures.
Oh, and I want to expand on that specifically, right? Moving forward, healing and creating better in the future. So how do we move away from what we currently have, the constructs that we currently have, and moving more towards truth and reparations?
I think we have to realize what actually it's going to take and be willing to do it. And that's a scary place. I think the needle was shifted for us in 2020. It was abruptly moved, and that's the place it needed to go, to be quite honest with you. But institutions, are they ready for that kind of bold shift? No. For the most part, no. So it will be more gradual, but what it takes is a big push, because from a Black standpoint, and James Baldwin says it perfectly, is what exactly am I supposed to keep waiting for? My grandfather waited for it. My father waited for it. I'm waiting for it. My children will be waiting for it. What exactly do you want us to keep waiting for? And so I think in the workforce now, we've never seen so many generations in it at once. We've got even Gen Alpha coming into the workforce now behind Gen Z. But yet we still have Gen Xer folks like myself and baby boomers in leadership. And there's an expectation on with the younger worker that's like, I wait for what?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you do this tomorrow? And so we owe them an explanation in that regard, you
Yeah.
know, because how much more and how much more are we asking them to wait for and why? And they want that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Well, like you said, what are
I
you
think,
waiting for? Like what
yes.
is this like fork in the road that all of a sudden now we're gonna turn and things are gonna be great? Like what is this landmark that we're all looking
Yeah.
for?
And I love your connecting the pandemic to this, because the pandemic forced us into this communal mindset of we need to take care of one another.
Mm-hmm.
And you felt that resistance. And
Mm-hmm.
that was where it was like, we can't wait for this. It's happening now. We have no choice. And so that's the question that's coming up for me now, is how do we create the urgency? How do we create the urgency without having to have, some other world event happening? Like, how do we start doing that within our organizations?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I'm not a fan of elaborate business cases. And I think too many business cases, I think we lead with that foot in this work and we say, well, okay, I'm not going to appeal directly to their heart and mind, so I'm going to make a business case for that. The business cases have been proven. 20% more teams are 20% more productive when DEI is integrated into business practice. That's out there. I think you know you're not going to, unless, like I said, unless you're actually open and vulnerable and serious, and are seriously compensating people in your organization for doing this work, whether they're in official capacity or not. You have to be willing to spend money on it. You have to be willing to say, this is important to our organization. We're centering this work, we're integrating this work into hardcore business. This is not seen as a fluff social side piece of everybody. Wouldn't it be great if we all got along? We've seen worldwide protest. We've had a pandemic teach us this has to be done. And so I think it's just that urgency needs to be felt in terms of actual resources, like actual hardcore dollars. Either one little exercise I like to do is making something. It's like a reverse brainstorm, I think it's called, and it's making something worse. Anything you could think of. Human beings we're fantastic at that. Anything you can think of that would make something absolutely the worst case scenario, and then working back from that until you get to the best place. And I think if we think about where we're headed and how, if we keep going on this trajectory, where that ends, I think it's very desirable. I think it becomes more desirable to say, oh, I don't want to go there. So let me work with some more urgency and see how we can work back from this. And if you don't have that expertise in your organization, outsource it.
Yeah.
Look outside. There's a lot of people that want to contribute, and they're perfectly willing and able to lend their voice to whatever it is that you need to get done in your organization. So get creative and pull in some voices if you don't have it. If you don't have the budget for it, or you just don't have that in your organization. But all you got to do is look around the room. And I ask that question: who's not here?
Yeah.
Do you need an elaborate business case?
Yeah. To that piece about outsourcing, because something came up for me that was a potential risk of that. How do you outsource the work and still integrate the accountability and the education? Because I think often what leaders do, they say, oh, I care about this. I've been told I need to invest. here's a training, here's another training, I'm done, I did my job. So how do we outsource it but still have that shift in culture that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think don't keep the outside person outside of your goals and your vision. There's a way outsourcing is just they're not a part of the company, as in their title or their position or what have you. They're not on the payroll in that way, but make them a part of your plan and make them feel like their voice is essential in you getting where you need to go. And that again speaks to structure and who's allowed to have a voice, because that person can be a great conduit between community voices that you need to hear, maybe who's even accessing your services, and having that expertise and training to get you where you need to be. So yeah, because they're outside and you're outsourcing, it doesn't mean they have to remain on the periphery of what you're doing.
So outsourcing, but bringing them in, making sure that they're part of the organization, understanding truly what your gaps are, and making sure they have exposure to the reality.
Yeah, like don't gatekeep. Make sure they have access to reports they need to have, or company history, or let them in that way and give them access to what they need to have access to help you solve your problem.
Yeah, what I heard in that is like partnering with them, like choosing a partner to help and support and move forward. Because you don't know what you don't know. And so having an outsourced resource that has been doing the work, is in the know, can partner with you to help open up doors.
It can be a good move sometimes as well, because it depends on the level of intensity or what's gone on in your organization. Sometimes there's horror stories where the environment is just so intense that anybody doing this work inside might face their own repercussions or backlash for doing it. So it's not always quite often it can be a good idea to have somebody that's not a part of that culture and doesn't have, that won't face those repercussions in the same way, to come in and be a neutral kind of party to the work. It's kind of in some cases you need somebody that's as much a mediator as a neutral mediator as much as a facilitator.
Yeah, I love that, a neutral mediator, and to just bring them in and make them part of the process. Because I think it's interesting, because I feel like it is a process to even partner with someone, right? Because you don't know all of your gaps yet. They don't know all of your gaps yet. And I think so the risk is when we jump to, oh, we got to do something. So I think we want to have the urgency, but not urgency to just run out there for any sort of training or any sort of performative action. If you didn't listen last week, we go into detail on that episode about what that means to be performative. And so if we're really being authentic, that means truly understanding your gaps as well, and making sure that the interventions and the people that you bring in are able to give you the solutions to create that shift, because that's a huge change management piece. And I think leaders who have been seasoned leaders understand that anytime you create any change, even when there isn't these invisible forces against you, it's still there's going to be resistance. And so you need to have urgency, you need to have the vision, you need to understand the gaps, you need to partner, you need to put money toward this. Because if your skin is not in the game, you're not going to stay the course, and you're not going to start to see that shift.
It's not going to work. And that's when you start hearing, oh, DEI doesn't work. Well, how much money did you put into it?
Did you invest?
You can't expect people to work magic in your organization and you don't give them a budget.
And sometimes it is a budget, and then the training re-traumatizes marginalized folks, because it's not it. And so, I mean, we've got 3 people here who can help you figure that out. And so reach out to us if you're unsure, because we want to make sure that the interventions that you choose are really going to work.
Absolutely.
And you really want to do it.
And
And
want to do
it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. We'll hold your hand through the process.
We're here to help. We're here to support all the way through.
But anything worth doing is going to be challenging.
Yes.
And it's worth the effort. It's something to be proud of, and it's something that really stands out in today's world. It wasn't valued as much in society. Like I still think, the values are rooted in white supremacy and patriarchy, but it's starting to shift. We're starting to see that tipping point, I think, especially with Gen Z. You see that, like, to your point, Kathleen, they're like, what are we waiting for? Why? Like, what? Like, if we keep waiting, it's never going to happen. And
it's becoming a business necessity. Like, there isn't a choice anymore, right? Like, there isn't. And so, like, that's nice because they will be forced into it, but you can just do it. You can just volunteer. You don't have to wait until you are absolutely forced to do it. Just engage in the work.
Yeah. So we only have 4 minutes left, and I want to be mindful. I want to hear a little bit about Kathleen, the book that is coming out that you're writing. Tell us more about that.
Yes, it's coming out this year. It's called Hard Talk, Getting Good at Diversity and Inclusion, and it's a part of divesting from that perfection. So I shot this around with people that I bounced creative ideas off of, and they said, well, what about mastering diversity and inclusion? And I said, I don't know about you, and maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's just exhaustion. I'm done mastering things. And so I just thought, what if we just start with the basics? Because I found a lot of people not understanding basic terminology, not understanding how things play out on a very ground level. And so we're trying to have all these advanced discussions and interventions and workshops, and yet we're not understanding simple things. And so a part of that urgency that we were just talking about is great, but at the same time, it's causing people to dive in head first and then hit their head in the bottom of the water. So how do we actually start to have these conversations in a more thoughtful and respectful, progressive manner, rather than just diving into kind of be performative? So that's what the book is about.
I love that. Let me know when it's out, because I will definitely read it. And I feel like that is a trap that I fall into, because when you've been close to this space or close to this work, there's an unintentional gatekeeping of DEI as well. Like, even just saying DEI, like DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some people call it EDI, some people call it DIBE, some people like I love that. Like, just really getting to the basic terminology, where do I start, and divesting from that perfection, because that's probably going to move the dial more than a lot of these other things that seem more complex.
Yeah. A lot of people don't want to do something because they expect they have to show up perfectly. And so they don't even start.
Yes. And I think that also comes from that patriarchal mindset of, it's not a safe space to make mistakes. And so we'd rather not try. We'd rather not go there. We'd rather just focus on what we're good at instead of getting uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in our last few minutes, I want to invite anybody who is listening to this, if you have a comment or a question, add it into the comments wherever you're watching it, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. We do get notifications. We will come back and respond to them. Even if you are watching this after the fact, we still see those comments coming through, and we can continue to generate really helpful, powerful conversation in this, right? The conversations and the basics and understanding, and just reach out, because we definitely want to respond. We will have a tip jar coming for Kathleen. She'll provide us with a link, because
not a tip jar. Sorry. So Kathleen, so we mentioned on the last episode, for transparency, we don't have the budget yet to pay our speakers, and we do not want to be part of the problem of not paying people in this space for doing the work. So Kathleen has given us a link to donate to her favorite charity. She's on the chair of the board at Odihi Foundation. And so we'll put the link in the comments and you can make a donation. So if you found value out of this conversation, please donate to Odihi.
Yes, thank you for the correction and
No
for
worries.
taking that over. I appreciate it. Yes. Other pieces, if you are listening to this on our podcast, make sure that you follow and rate us so that more people can find it. Make sure that you share it out with anybody who you think would find this valuable as well. We want to reach as many people as possible. And if your company is in a moment where they're ready to do the work and needing help, you can reach out to us at the Disruptors at jobdisruptors.com. We are offering a free DEI evaluation right now, as well as Kathleen, who is a DEI specialist, and either one of us is more than happy to help and support you along those lines.
Yeah, and so you can follow Kathleen on TikTok and Instagram. Her handle is at KMJ Diversity. I will put the link in the comments as well after this. There is also a link in the comments to our Black History Month resource that we created. Kathleen's links are actually in there as well. So please don't forget to get that download. That's something that you can have as the work that you need to do as an individual or as a leader. Have that saved, not just for Black History Month, but go back to it from time to time to really, have a place where you can kind of do a deep dive and follow, whatever it is that you feel like you need most in this moment.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you next week where we talk about bias in, bias out. What does equitable data use look like? So thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen.